morning. Welcome back to the Sweet Tea series. My name is Ariana Guajardo. If you are listening to this on release day, that means it is March 31st, which is notably not César Chávez Day. It was in years past, but not anymore, because of an expose from the New York Times, which exposed his sexual assault and rape of minors. And we're going to be talking about that today, and also why, even if that hadn't come out, we should not have been celebrating him in Texas in the first place. He has nothing to do with Texas history, and his ideology has nothing in alignment with Texas values. So let's start with the article that was released from the New York Times. It was called "César Chávez, a civil rights icon, is accused of abusing girls for years." So if you have not had a chance to read the article, I would highly recommend it. It is absolutely atrocious and awful, the things that he did. But not only that, all of the people who knew about it and stayed silent for years. And to me, this is not, it's sad, but none of this stuff is any longer surprising when people who already have an evil ideology do evil things. So the two women who were mentioned were Ana Murguia and Deborah Rojas. So these women are now in their 60s, but they detail how Cesar Chavez abused them when they were minors, groomed them, and began molesting them, and how that behavior continued to evolve into their later teen years. And one of the most tragic parts of that was what I was mentioning earlier, is how many people knew and chose to stay silent. So the claims that they're making in the New York Times, it's almost astonishing how much evidence they had. And that's because these girls were telling basically everyone around them. So when the New York Times is speaking to people from the past, they're able to say, yeah, they told me this, decades ago, or right around the time they were happening. I remember when they were telling me when I was a teen too. Or even one of the girls had a story where she was telling her mom, well, I realized he was just a man. And she says that her mom knew exactly what that meant. But then later on in the story, her mother allows her to accompany Chavez, and this girl ends up staying in his motel room. So his entire security team, who were unwilling to comment on this matter, seem to all be aware. And it's just absolutely disgusting. But even if that hadn't been the case, if this hadn't come out yet, I'm still trying to understand why we were almost worshiping him basically in Texas to begin with. So I went to UT, and if you haven't been to the UT campus before, right in front of the student union is a statue of Cesar Chavez. And a little bit of history on him if you're not from California and Texas and hadn't heard of him before. So he founded the United Farm Workers Union. And again, like I was saying at the beginning, is someone who had a lot of similarities with socialism in the way that he spoke about capitalism and about workers. And again, this is a union that he started. So those kinds of things, of course, going hand in hand. But one of the things that he said back at a UFW convention, so this is in 1981, he said, "I would not take a cup of coffee from a grower. There's not a good one. I hate them. A few presents, a little talk, then the noose. That's how capitalism works." So he uses the word grower. That's his word that he would use for farmers. But of course, critiquing capitalism, but also that rhetoric of the us versus them in this context, to me, right away reminds me of a Karl Marx kind of thing, comparing the bourgeoisie with the proletariat. So I can't be the only one thinking about that. But then, of course, that kind of ideology and figureheads of that ideology, and I'm thinking of like the top figures, right? Like the leaders who had socialist and communist regimes, from Joseph Stalin to Mao to Kim Jong-il. All of these leaders have a history with having sexual relationships with minors. And now for like Stalin, I've heard some people questioning it, but if you're looking into that history, to me, it's pretty evident that there's reasons that there was like some shady stuff going on with a girl. Same thing with Mao and Kim Jong-il. There's people with evil ideologies doing evil things. We can't be surprised about that anymore. Now let's talk a little bit more about his work with United Farmers, with the United Farm Workers. Well, one thing to talk about is that is a movement that entirely took place in California. So labor union having to deal with farmers in California. Now you might be thinking, well, Texas also has a lot of Mexican Americans, which again, his union was specifically for Mexican Americans. But in Texas, if you're not familiar with Texas history and specifically Mexican American history in Texas, it's entirely different from what that looks like in California. These are not the same cultures. Chicano culture, quote unquote, is actually something that's born out of that labor movement of the 60s. So that's a term that I think even comes after that to describe the people in those surrounding regions. That's entirely separate from the quote unquote Tejanos of Texas. The Texas Tejano is something that goes back to pre-Texas being even a nation. And there were the people here who, along with the Anglos, helped settle Texas and make it what it is. It's tied to the vaquero, aka the cowboy that we saw in Texas. It's a free market system of actually a lot of ranching, and specifically with cattle. And there is, again, agriculture and farming as well, but it doesn't look the same as what was happening in California. And we didn't have the same kind of labor unions and uprisings that were the same in California. It's an entirely different system of an entirely different group of people. But the left, for some reason, props up Cesar Chavez, puts him not only in the middle of UT campus, but as a major road in Austin. Austin had renamed it from First Street, I think in the early 90s, to Cesar Chavez Street. Not to mention there's, I think it's around a dozen for both street names and schools named after him in Texas. This man who has nothing to do with Texas history or with our culture at all. So why would he be a central figure? Why would the left hoist him upon us and make him into this idol for Mexican Americans in the state of Texas? And I think it's because he represents what he wishes Mexican Americans, and specifically Mexican Texans were. Just to be farm workers who are beholden to the left as their union bosses. And to me, that has nothing to do with my history here in Texas, and it has nothing to do with my beliefs, let alone Texas beliefs, let alone the free market system of Texas and our history. It doesn't have a place here. And so not only am I glad that this is a story that's being exposed because these girls deserve better and deserve their one of them was talking about the reason why she spoke up was her street that she lived on was being renamed after Cesar Chavez, her abuser, and that was her last line. She could not, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. She was tired of her abuser being propped up, and now she was going to have to face him every day if she looked out to her street. Well, she shouldn't have to go through that. And in Texas, again, he has nothing to do with us. And that's why I am glad that there are a lot of cities that are reconsidering naming streets, reconsidering statues. And thankfully, the Texas education is no longer going to include him in their curriculum. As I continue to say, I question what he was doing there in the first place. Just because someone came out of Mexico at one point doesn't mean that history remains the same when they are in different groups of places at different times in different states. And I actually think that's very belittling to see Mexican American or anyone of Hispanic heritage or descent as some kind of conglomerate that all thinks and believes the same way. But it doesn't surprise me that would be something that's advantageous to the left, especially as more Hispanic areas such as the Rio Grande Valley, some of them are actually considering voting for Republicans. This is something that has been a moving trend. We don't know exactly which way that's going to go, but it's a real consideration for people at the ballot. It's no longer Hispanics just automatically voting for someone because they have a D next to their name. And there actually is intellectual diversity among different ethnic groups of people. Whoa, what a surprise. People can think differently. All that to say, I am glad that there are those reconsiderations. However, this brings us to his Second in command, the woman who he founded this organization with and worked alongside him for years, Dolores Huerta. So in the article, Huerta was also mentioned her story and her history with Cesar Chavez and her story of sexual abuse by him. So she claims to have been raped by him twice, and he fathered 2 of her children, which she claims were from those instances. But this is a woman who worked alongside him for years, knew about his activity, likely, very, very likely knew what was happening to these other girls, and continued to recruit people for him. That alone is absolutely deplorable. Not to mention that she herself is also a very well-known socialist figure. To this day, she's an honorary chair of the Democratic Socialist of America. You also may have heard a common slogan that came from her, "Si se puede," meaning yes, we can, often chanted by the left. She is a far left figure in and of herself, and I don't think that she has any other place to be propped up. So the Austin ISD this year decided that their schools are not going to be closed for Cesar Chavez Day. Instead, they're being closed for Dolores Huerta Day. And just because Cesar Chavez is a monster doesn't mean that we need to prop up another socialist in his stead. Hispanics do not need someone to idolize and to be representing and overseeing us of what we mean as a culture. And it definitely doesn't have to be someone that has socialist ideology. So I am hoping that people reconsider using her as a figurehead of either Hispanics or of as a figure that we should, in all of Texas, adore enough to give her her own day for people to have off of school. Like, look, I understand that Austin ISD already had that date on the calendar. Fine. If people made arrangements around it, that's fine. Just take the day off. But there's no reason to prop up a socialist figure to do so. So if you are wanting to read more, you can find my piece in the Daily Wire. It's called "The Left Hid Cesar Chavez's Rapes and Turned Him into a Saint." I hope that you all enjoy your day regardless of the man that was once associated with it, and I will see you next time.